Hi folks, how you doing? It's James JT at the movies. Welcome back to Debriefing 007. This is episode 23. I'm really pleased. We're on the home stretch now with these folks and I'm really enjoying making these episodes for you. We're going to take a look this time at probably the most popular of the modern Bond films. Not necessarily my opinion, but it seems to be the general consensus that this is the most popular of the recent Bond films. 2012's celebratory film to celebrate Bond's 50th anniversary on the silver screen, Skyfall. As I say, Skyfall came out in 2012, the 50th anniversary of the James Bond cinema franchise that started way back with Dr. No in 1962. Much as they'd done with previous anniversaries, the 25th and the 40th, the producers decided that this was going to be the year of Bond, and they really wanted to go all out in terms of the promotion for not only this film, but things to tie into it as well. The first 22 films were released in a fantastic Blu-ray box set, the Bond 50 box set, which I'm sure most collectors are familiar with, that had the new remastered versions of the Blu-ray films, all of them available for the first time on Blu-ray, apart from a handful of ones that have been released before in a fantastic collector's edition set. It included some new special features as well as things ported over from the various DVD and video editions from over the years. And that was a really great set that really sort of hyped Bond fans up for Skyfall. It even left a little space in the back with a disc hole for Skyfall so that you could put your Skyfall disc in it when you obviously finally got that on home media. As well as that, they did the fantastic Everything or Nothing documentary that was a retrospective of not just cinematic Bond, mostly cinematic Bond, but also touched on Ian Fleming's writing process and his life during the war as well, and is probably the most comprehensive look at the series that we've had in documentary form to date. For anybody that's not checked that out yet, I would recommend checking it out. It was available here for a time on YouTube. I don't know whether the copyright holders have had that taken down or not, but if not, it's fairly easy to get a hold of on DVD or Blu-ray if that's what you fancy. I've got the DVD myself, and for a documentary I think it's absolutely fine. Initially this film was supposed to come out in 2010. Quantum of Solace had been released in 2008, and unfortunately MGM found themselves in some financial troubles and were actually thinking that they were going to have to file for bankruptcy. Thankfully they were able to come out of the other side of those troubles, and then the release date was set for 2012. It tied in nicely with the aforementioned 50th anniversary of the franchise. Not long after Quantum of Solace had come out in the cinemas, the producers had already tapped Sam Mendes to direct the next instalment. Sam Mendes was a friend and previous collaborator of Daniel Craig's as well. In fact, he actually told Daniel Craig not to take the role of James Bond, as it would be potentially career suicide for him before he took the role in Casino Royale. But after seeing Craig in Casino Royale, actually relented that he'd given him the wrong advice and that Craig was bloody fantastic, which is something that I can agree with as well. Craig might not have been the obvious choice back in the day, but he's been absolutely superb in the role, and as I've mentioned in my previous two Craig reviews, he has been the one constant throughout his series, and in terms of his performance at least. Initially, Peter Morgan was set to write the script, but he left the project in 2010 when MGM fell into their financial troubles, and so the services were retained of veteran Bond writers Robert Wade, Neil Purvis, and this time newcomer John Logan. A lot of story elements were apparently kept over from Morgan's draft, but the three writers then crafted what we now know and love to be Skyfall. With Sam Mendes being brought in as the director, he also brought in Roger Deakins as the cinematographer, a frequent collaborator of his, and he also brought in his most frequent collaborator, his conductor and his composer, Thomas Newman, who takes over the musical duties from David Arnold. Now, this is something that I'm not a fan of, and we'll touch on a bit later in this review. I wish that they'd really kept hold of David Arnold, as I think he is, let's say, the absolute perfect successor to John Barry when it comes to scoring these James Bond films. Thomas Newman's work is okay, but it feels really a little bit bland for Bond, and the fact that he's had to borrow from Arnold's score and hasn't even re-recorded the pieces, but like the Bond fanfare, whenever that plays, it's the version that David Arnold did that was used in Casino Royale, and that just speaks volumes to me that they haven't chosen the right person for the job. When this film was released, it received absolutely glowing praise from the critics and said that it was Bond back to his best and an absolute triumph celebrating the 50th anniversary of the franchise. This film, for me, has been really a film that I've had an interesting relationship with. When I first saw it in the cinema, I absolutely loved it, which is usually the reaction I have, been the die-hard Bond fan that I am. I came out of Spectre thinking it was the best Bond film I'd seen in years, and then when I got the Blu-ray and watched it again at home, I actually couldn't get through it. Now, whereas I can sit and watch Skyfall happily through, I sort of come to a bit of an opinion that this isn't really, for me, a James Bond film in the traditional sense. It's a drama. And a bit of a thriller as well, obviously, but mostly it seems to be a sort of a character study and a bit of a drama starring the characters of James Bond. And whilst there are definitely some fantastic Bond elements in there, and some absolutely all-time Bond moments, I don't know what it is about this film, but there's just something about it for me that doesn't feel like a James Bond film. But I must applaud the producers and the writers and the director for doing something different with the franchise, because it's very easy for the franchise to become stale after especially 50 years of doing the same thing over and over again. So I suppose it's a bit of a double-edged sword, really, is what I'm saying there, because as a fan I'm sort of saying, but I want what you did last time. But actually, they're trying something new, because when they do the repeated formula over and over again, it gets so outlandish that it gets to the point of things like Die Another Day or Moonraker or whatever. So I suppose you can't have your cake and eat it too, can you? But I've always felt that way about Skyfall. Craig is superb in it, as is Judi Dench. Javier Bardem is fantastic as the villain. Bernice Marlowe, in her brief role in it as Severin, is fantastic. It's just superb. You know, the cast are superb, the acting's superb, and the story's great. But it just doesn't feel like a Bond film to me. Let's have a bit of a plot recap, shall we? This film begins in Istanbul. The pre-title sequence, we see James Bond and new agent Eve on a mission. They're after Patrice, who is an international gun-for-hire terrorist who's stolen a hard drive which contains a list of all MI6 and all NATO's undercover and embedded secret agents in it. They're pursuing Patrice through Istanbul with Bond hot on his heels, chasing on a motorbike. And this was the scene that I mentioned earlier in the Debriefing series that was actually initially written for what would become GoldenEye, with a motorbike chase across the rooftops of the Grand Bazaar, but it was ultimately left behind to be used for another film. Eve gives chase to Patrice and watches on as the pair of them fight to the death on top of a train for control of the hard drive list. M is speaking to Eve through a communication radio and tells her to take the shot, meaning to try and kill Patrice. But in all the commotion she misses and ends up shooting Bond, who falls off the train into the water below. Patrice manages to escape as Eve looks on in horror as she believes she's killed James Bond. And it's at that point that we launch into the title sequence of this film. Thankfully, this time again designed by Daniel Kleinman, the rightful person to be doing it. And we get the absolutely sublime return to classic Bond song, Skyfall, from Adele. Absolutely superb song. And I really like that the title sequence for this film, and it also does it with Spectre as well, but the title sequence for this film echoes the themes that are going to be sort of explored throughout the film. And I know obviously this is something that's usually done in most of the Bond films, and especially is really prevalent in the Brosnan era, with like the computer and the media angle in Tomorrow Never Dies and GoldenEye, the fall of the Soviet Union, and etc. You know, and I really like that they do that again and they explore that we're going to go to Skyfall Manor at the end of the house, and sort of Bond sort of, you know, falling into the river and sort of then sort of going through the title sequence as his animated form. I really, really like that. 3 months after the events of the pre-title sequence, M is summoned to a meeting with Gareth Mallory, who's the head of the Intelligence Security Committee, and he's basically holding her to account over what happened with the stolen hard drive. He explains that she will be retiring after a 3-month transitional period where a new head of MI6 will be appointed. He also lets her know that there will be a public inquiry that she will need to attend with members of Parliament later on. On the way back from this meeting, M receives a mysterious message just at the same point as MI6's servers are hacked. As she opens the message on her phone on the bridge outside the MI6 headquarters, the building explodes in front of her. We then catch up with James Bond, who's been living his life in retirement, in exile if you will, and he's somewhere over in the Far East, basically just spending his days drinking and romancing women. He sees the explosion on the TV and decides that it's time to head back to active service. and returns to London. In London, Bond breaks into M's house, which I thought was a nice callback to Casino Royale. Bond, never break into my house again, and yet he does it again. The two then share a fairly tense little scene, but it culminates with a little bit of a joke when Judi Dench says to Bond, "Well, you should have called, and you're bloody not sleeping here." And I just really like that because it leans into the sort of the almost mother-son dynamic that they've got, that they really went to great lengths to establish in Casino and Quantum. And even though currently this film isn't related to the previous two, obviously Spectre decides that it's going to go and wreck on that in one of the worst decisions in the series history. Maybe not as bad as kite surfing down an ice tsunami, but it's up there. But yeah, so it sort of really leans into that whole sort of like, you know, surrogate mother, surrogate son sort of dynamic. And I really like that because they do have that really great dynamic. Bond then gets brought up to speed while he goes through a series of mental and physical tests to make sure that he's fit to return to active duty. He actually fails these tests, though M tells him he's passed. Bond meets with M and Gareth Mallory. Mallory asks Bond, well, why not stay dead? Why not stay out of it? It's a young man's game. Now, this was something I always never really got with Skyfall, because Casino Royale, obviously only just a few years previous, and Quantum of Solace really show Bond as a sort of immature might be the wrong word, but a better word escapes me at the moment, but you know, sort of a new agent. He's not necessarily making all the right decisions, and he's learning from his mistakes as he goes. And he's not yet really the James Bond that we sort of know and love, even though they end Casino Royale sort of implying that he is, and then he's not in Quantum of Solace. And then we get the scene at the end of Quantum of Solace where he leaves the necklace in the snow and walks off, and it's that whole, yeah, I'm James Bond now. And then now we seem to have missed all of Bond's adventures, and he's sort of towards the end of his tenure, which it seems an interesting choice on the part of the filmmakers. But I suppose given the length of time between the two films, and Daniel Craig obviously, you know, probably in his mid-40s or whatever he would have been at the time, it's you know, it's an understandable choice that the filmmakers have made. M gives Bond his orders first to go and meet the new quartermaster and pick up his equipment for this mission, and then to head to Shanghai where Patrice has been spotted with hopes of recovering the missing agents list. In an art gallery in London, Bond and the new Q finally meet, and they share a great scene which sort of playfully tips the hat to Desmond Llewellyn's Q and the Bond and Q interactions of years gone by. I really like it. Again, the scene sort of culminates with a bit of a joke where the two sort of reach a mutual respect for each other, if you like. Well, exploding pens, we don't really go in for that sort of thing anymore. Like I say, it's a tip of the hat to the series gone by, and then also letting us as the audience know that whilst this is going to be the Q and Bond dynamic that we know and love, that it's a different Q and it's a different Bond. And I really did like that scene. I think Ben Whishaw does fantastic as Q as well. In Shanghai, Bond manages to track down Patrice. He's unable to stop him from killing the target that he set out to kill, but the two have a fight which ultimately culminates in Patrice falling off the side of a building to the streets below. Bond is unable to learn anything from Patrice himself before he falls to his death, but does find a casino chip for a casino in Macau, which is where Bond heads next. Bond and Eve go to the casino in Macau to find out what's going on. Bond goes to the cash desk and cashes in the chip. It's at that point that he's given a briefcase full of money, and one of this film's Bond ladies makes herself known, and that's Severine, played by Bernice Marlowe. The two have a conversation over a drink where Severine reveals that she would like Bond to kill her employer, this film's lead villain, Raoul Silva, who we've not actually met yet, and we're probably about 30-35 minutes into the film at this point, if not more, and we've still not met the lead villain. That's an interesting choice on the part of the filmmakers, but it certainly does help to build the suspense around the character and makes him much more of a compelling villain when he does show up. Severin asks Bond if he'll meet her on her yacht if he can first subdue her bodyguards, who've made it known that Bond is now a target of theirs. If he can get past them and get back to the yacht, then Severin will take him back to her employer so that Bond can meet him and eventually try and kill him. In a really great fight scene where Bond is occasionally aided by Eve, Bond manages to take out the bodyguards, leaving them for dead in a pit of bearded dragons in the casino. Bond makes a usual Bond-esque one-liner and then heads to the yacht. It's there that he shares a love scene with Severin, which feels a little bit creepy given the fact that she's a former sex worker and has been, you know, in the trade since she was a young teenager, so the film implies it. I don't know that was necessary. I know that James Bond obviously has his ladies, and there's always a first lady in the film and then a secondary lady and all that sort of. I really don't know if that was necessary in this scene. And then when they come on the deck, as they're heading towards the island where Severin's employer Silver lives, they realise that the crew has taken over the boat and they're being held at gunpoint. When they arrive at the island, the crew then take Severin off, and two of the crew deliver James Bond to this film's leading villain, Raoul Silver. Silver is a former MI6 agent. He'd worked for M during the 80s and the 90s, when the UK had control of Hong Kong. And during the transition of power in the late 90s, Silver had actually acted over and above his station, and had actually hacked into the Chinese Secret Service. So for a peaceful transfer, M decided to give him up. And that's really the catalyst for Silver's hatred for M, and the whole sort of starting point of the villain's plan. Now, Silver's introduction scene to Bond is actually a really good one. He starts at the far end of a room and he's talking to Bond about his relationship with M, and gives an analogy of two rats on an island to really try and illustrate the picture as to how Silver sees things in the world at this moment in time. And the two share a tense scene that has a couple of sort of comic relief moments in it, but ultimately you really get the impression that Silver is a menacing villain. The pair of them then head outside the building that they've been talking in, where Severin is stood at the end of a firing range, looking very much distraught. And it's at that point that Silver places a shot of scotch on her head and gives Bond a gun. Silver then puts a gun to Bond's head, after telling Bond that M has sent him out on duty when he's not passed the physical or mental tests and he's not ready. Silver puts the gun to Bond's head and tells Bond that he must shoot the glass of scotch off Severin's head, otherwise he'll shoot Bond. Bond tries to shoot and completely misses, with the bullet flying past Severin's head and hitting the wall behind her. Silver then proudly exclaims, "My turn," and shoots Severin dead. And that's a really interesting point of the film, because when I first watched this in the cinema way back in 2012, I was thinking that Severin was going to be the main Bond girl of the film, and that she and Bond were going to end up together and they were going to have a "oh, James" moment at the end of the film. I really was expecting that. So when she got killed there and then, I was like, bloody hell. Because like I said, they hadn't really introduced another character. I suppose there was Eve, but I kind of had a bit of an inkling as to where that was going, and I'll talk about that later on in this review. After Silver has shot Severin, it's then revealed that Bond has activated his distress beacon, and in a really smug little scene where he goes, "It's the latest thing from Q Branch, a radio." The MI6 cavalry turn up, rescue Bond, and take Silver into custody. Back in London, we see Silver in an MI6 holding cell at the new MI6 headquarters. M has a reunion with Silver while Bond watches on. And this is one of my criticisms of this film, is that this film came out in the wake of Christopher Nolan's Dark Knight trilogy. And that trilogy of films has really gone on to influence quite a lot in cinema of the last 10 years. And you can tell that this film is heavily influenced by that trilogy. But the scene where Silver is in the prison cell and he's talking with M, and he reveals that he has a disfigurement, which is purely just for shock value really in that scene, is clearly a take on Heath Ledger's performance as the Joker. And I think it's also worth noting as well that Thomas Newman, the composer, seems to have, at least to my ears, have lifted cues out of the Dark Knight trilogy score composed by Hans Zimmer and James Newton Howard. If you listen at the end towards Skyfall, where Skyfall's about to explode and Bond sets off into the priest hole, the cues are very much similar to the Batman theme that they give Christian Bale's Batman. It feels a little bit on the nose to me, does that? And this whole prison scene feels much the same, like I say. But we do get some exposition from M. She again reaffirms who Silver is and that he'd worked for her previously. And lets us know that his real name is Tiago Rodriguez, and that Silver must be a code name. In the MI6 headquarters, Q tries to decrypt Silver's laptop, but inadvertently sets off a computer program that allows Silver to escape from his prison cell. Silver then escapes into the London Underground, which is connected to the war bunkers that MI6 are currently using as their headquarters. Q then summarises with Bond that Silver clearly wanted to be captured and knew that MI6's backup plan, should HQ be destroyed, is that they would retreat into the war bunkers. So Silver has set off the explosion and then deliberately been captured, knowing full well that he will be able to make his escape from the backup location of the underground bunker. With Q giving directions over radio, Bond gives chase to Silver and the London Underground. Silver manages to change into a police uniform along the way, which helps him temporarily lose Bond. However, through Q's keen eye using CCTV, he manages to find the on a train. Bond then jumps from the platform onto the back of the train in a really, really cool scene. Silver then heads to the public inquiry where M is being questioned by members of Parliament over the events of the start of the film where the hard drive had been lost. Silver bursts in and starts shooting up the place. Bond isn't far behind. Mallory dives in front of M, getting shot in the process. In and amongst all the commotion, Bond is able to get M to safety and the pair flee in an MI6 car. Bond then calls Q and asks him to leave a trail of electronic breadcrumbs for Silver to follow, faking a tracking signal from a car. Bond then discards of the MI6 vehicle, opting to use his own Aston Martin DB5. Now this is a real sort of nod and a wink and a bit of an homage for the fans really, and it's clearly been put in because it's the 50th anniversary of the franchise. It's the Goldfinger DB5 of course, but it's got all the bells and whistles, and M makes a joke as they're driving away saying, "Go on then, eject me," as she's complaining about how comfy the car is and how long it's going to take to get where they're going. Mallory, who's had his gunshot wound treated, sees what Q's been doing and gives him the go-ahead to continue. Bond and M head north to Scotland where they arrive at Bond's family home where he spent the first few years of his childhood, Skyfall Manor. The manor has long since been abandoned and is in the process of being sold when Bond arrives there, only being maintained by the former gamekeeper Kincaid. Now this part was actually written for Sean Connery, and the producers initially wanted to have him come back, obviously not playing James Bond, not being a former agent, but being the character of Kincaid, and they wanted it to be a nice sort of celebratory tie-in, but they decided ultimately that it would take away too much from the film, and that it was likely that Connery wouldn't want to return and do it. So in the end, they gave the role to Albert Finney, and I'm really glad that they did that. I think if they'd have put Sean Connery in it, I mean, he'd have been around 80 at the time. I think he'd have possibly been a hair too old to get involved in the action. Having said that, Harrison Ford's 80 and he's making Indiana Jones 5 at the moment, so you never know, do you? I suppose is what I'm saying, and I suppose if you're well enough, you're fit enough to do it. Age is but a number. But yeah, I'm glad that the role went to Albert Finney and that it wasn't just like a piece of stunt casting or anything like that, because I think it really would have taken away from some of the weight of the third act of the film up at Skyfall Manor. Initially, some of Silver's men turn up and try and raid the house. Bond manages to take care of all of them with the help of Kincaid and M, but M is wounded in the process. Silver then arrives by a helicopter with John Lee Hooker's music playing out of the speakers on it, and that's just a really cool scene, is that. It's very rare that the Bond films use popular music, as they usually rely on the fantastic scores provided by the likes of John Barry, David Arnold, and and all the other host of fantastic composers that have been involved in the series throughout the years. So when they do decide to use a piece of popular music, 9 times out of 10 it works quite well. I'm not thinking about the scene in A View to a Kill though, where they use the Beach Boys song. As Silver arrives, Bond sends M and Kincaid into the priest hole, a tunnel that leads to the nearby church on the next hill. It's revealed that Bond used to hide in this tunnel as a child and actually retreated into this tunnel when he found out that his parents had been killed. In and amongst the chaos, Skyfall Manor and Silver's helicopter are destroyed and are engulfed in flames. Bond escapes just before the house blows up to smithereens down the same priest hole and heads out towards the chapel where M and Kincaid are waiting for him. As Bond comes out the other side of the priest hole and starts to run across a frozen lake, he hears gunshots go off and realises that Silver's just behind him with one of his men. Bond and Silver's goon end up in an underwater fight in the frozen lake where ultimately Bond comes out on top. At the chapel, M and Kincaid are expecting Bond to arrive, but in walks Silver. Silver, completely deranged at this point, takes his gun, puts it into M's hand and shares an embrace with her, placing the gun against her forehead, asking her to pull the trigger, relieving both of them of the misery that they're involved in. Of course she doesn't do this, and Bond bursts in and throws a knife into Silver's back, ultimately killing him. The scene then plays off as though everything's going to be fine, and Bond even starts to give one of his sort of Bondish one-liners when M suddenly collapses and the scene turns really, really serious again. M then succumbs to her wounds in Bond's arms, but in a final breath lets Bond know that she made the right choice making him a 00. Again evoking that sort of almost mother-son-like relationship that they seem to have set up throughout the first 3 films. And it's a really, really heartfelt moment, and Judi Dench and Daniel Craig play it absolutely superbly. And I suppose really it's at that point that you sort of realise as a viewer that there's no leading lady for this film, and that actually the leading lady of this film is Judi Dench's M. And I think that that's a really brilliant thing that the producers and the writers did. They decided to actually give the character a farewell that she deserves. We then come back to the final scene of the film, which is back at the MI6 offices in Whitehall this time. Bond's on top of the building looking out at the London skyline when Eve comes out to join him and lets him know that M's will has been read and that she's left him the statue of the British Bulldog that's been on her desk throughout the film. Eve muses that maybe that was M's way of telling him that it's time he takes a desk job, and Bond, fully understanding, says no, quite the opposite. The two of them then head down to an office. It's at that point that we're suddenly in a really familiar scene for Bond fans, and eagle-eyed Bond fans will have noticed straight away that we're in Moneypenny's office. It's at that point that Eve reveals possibly the worst kept secret of the film, but I'm really glad that they did this, that she is in fact Eve Moneypenny, and that she's decided not to return to active service after the incident where she almost killed Bond at the start of the film, and that she's going to remain on as the secretary to the new head of the MI6. Bill Tanner then comes through the famous leather-bound door and says, "He'll see you now, 007, and Bond enters M's classic office from the first 16 James Bond films, from Connery through to Dalton. At the end of the office, we see Gareth Mallory, who's been appointed the new M after Judi Dench's passing. And as the Bond theme begins to slowly rise in the background, the new M asks, "Are you ready to get back to work, 007? Bond responds, "With pleasure, M, with pleasure." And the gun barrel sequence flashes across the screen, the Bond theme blares out fantastically, and the Bond logo comes up saying James Bond will return. What an absolutely superb ending to an anniversary edition 007. On this most recent rewatch for me, I have to say I really enjoyed this film. Now, it's been probably a couple of 3 years since I watched this film. I'm not sure if I've watched it since I did a watch through about 4 or 5 years ago with Laura. I might have watched it the once since, but I really enjoyed it. And the last time I watched it, I didn't enjoy it all that much, but this time I had such a great time with it. I was really hyped for it. And Quantum of Solace, which I've actually in recent years enjoyed a bit more than Skyfall. I'm not entirely sure why, and please don't hate me, folks. I really didn't enjoy that one on this most recent rewatch, but Skyfall I absolutely loved. Now, I still stand by my comments that this doesn't feel like a Bond film to me, in the sense of obviously a lot of the traditional elements of the James Bond series are absent from this film. And it feels more like a character drama with the character of James Bond in it rather than an action Bond film. I know there are action set pieces in the film, and I know that there are lots of things that make it James Bond in it, and I can't really find the words, and I've been racking my brain before making this video to try and find the right words to explain how I feel, but for me it just doesn't feel like a Bond film, but it is an absolutely superb film. So there's no negative criticism from me here in regards to the quality of the film. Like I say, it just doesn't feel Bondian enough, if that's such a thing. The cast are superb. Daniel Craig is well and truly relaxed into playing James Bond. He's found his feet with it, which seems to happen for most Bond actors by their third entry, really. Roger Moore is definitely probably at his most at home in The Spy Who Loved Me. Pierce Brosnan, as much as I'm not a fan of the film, in The World Is Not Enough is definitely the most relaxed. Of course, Sean Connery in Goldfinger, again, even though that's not my favourite film of the series, is the epitome of cool in that series. So I'm really glad to see that Daniel Craig had sort of followed suit and had a really strong third entry where he's really found his stride with it. Javier Bardem is absolutely amazing as the villain Raul Silva, and I really liked the fact that they elected not to, at least at that time, continue on with the story that they set up in Quantum and kind of let Sleeping Dogs lie for now with that, and did something unrelated. It was really nice not to have the baggage of the previous two films involved and just have a standalone adventure. Silver is menacing, he's amusing, and he's scary, but he's got so many different qualities about him. He's unhinged. It's just it's amazing as the performance, and the quality of acting that Bardem brings to the role is brilliant. But I can't help but make comparisons to the Heath Ledger Joker portrayal from the few years previous film The Dark Knight. I definitely think that he'd taken some inspiration from that. And like I say, the musical cues used by Thomas Newman towards the end of the film are definitely inspired by the Zimmer Newton Howard Dark Knight trilogy score. Naomi Harris playing Eve Moneypenny is brilliant. She gets the classic Moneypenny sort of feel right at the end of the film, and you can sort of tell that they're going to have that sort of little bit of a cheeky relationship that they've got. And I really liked the fact that it gave a bit of backstory as to why they're like that and why they're so flirtatious. She's clearly got a thing for Bond and idolises him a bit at the start of the film, and she's clearly trying to impress him. She's horrified when she shoots him and believes that she's the one that's killed him. And then when he comes back, there's a lot of flirting that goes on, especially the scene just before they go to the casino in Macau where she's helping him shave. And, you know, it's really implied that they're probably going to sleep together at that point, but they don't, of course, because it's the whole sort of, you know, close but no cigar thing with the Bond and Moneypenny relationship. And I really like that. I could see it coming. I really did have my inkling going into that film. I think she's Moneypenny. And yes, there'd been online rumours and things like that at the time, but it all just seemed to track. Ben Whishaw plays Q, and I think he's a brilliant successor to Desmond Llewellyn, and I really like how they've updated the character and they've made him sort of more of a modern sort of computer sort of savvy younger bloke, and I do hope that he sticks around after Daniel Craig goes. It'd be really nice if the supporting cast of obviously Ralph Fiennes as M, Moneypenny played by Naomi Harris, and Ben Wishaw's Q could stick around and have that sort of continuity. I get the feeling that after No Time to Die they're going to completely recast everything, but I do hope that they keep them around because they're really just absolutely superb as a supporting cast. Sam Mendes did an absolutely fantastic job directing this film. You can tell that he's got a real respect and passion for the source material and that he's been a fan of the franchise from the word go. Roger Deakins' cinematography coupled with that directing is absolutely sublime as well. This film is one of the most beautifully shot Bond films, and it's visually stunning. The colours and the vibrance of the images on screen, it's really fantastic stuff. Yeah, folks, I really like this film, and I think most Bond fans do. Like I say, it just doesn't quite feel like a Bond film to me, but that doesn't take away from the fact that it is an absolutely superb film. I think I'd rate this film 7 out of 10. So there we are, folks. That's been my thoughts and my ramblings, my retrospective review on 2012 Skyfall. There's a whole wealth of behind-the-scenes material with this film and its production, and I could have made a video twice as long talking about all that, but really it's just about how I felt with this most recent rewatch and the run-up to No Time to Die, and really, I loved it. What did you think about this film when you guys watched it? Let me know in the comments down below. I'd love to hear your thoughts as always. Drop the video a thumbs up if you haven't done already, and if you're not already subscribed to the channel, please think about doing so. I'd love to have you stick around for future videos, and of course it helps the channel to grow as well. Above all else, folks, take care of yourselves, and I look forward to seeing you for the final instalment of Debriefing 007, where we take a look at 2015's Spectre.